Hello and welcome, I'm Joshua Barnes and you're watching NewsX World. Let's first take a look at our top stories. NATO chief Mark Rutte says that more resources and forces are needed to be prepared to face any threat as he speaks ahead of a summit on Ukrainian military support. This comes as the Kremlin accuses Kyiv of continued attacks on civilian infrastructure while hinting at a third round of direct peace talks. A US-backed aid group in Gaza have halted distribution today as the IDF warns that nearby roads of aid centres will be considered combat zones. Meanwhile, 10 people have reportedly been killed in a strike on a school in Khan Yunis as the Red Cross chief tells the BBC that Gaza is worse than hell. Meanwhile, the Israeli military says it has shelled targets in response to projectiles launched from Syria into the Golan Heights. Israel's defense minister says Syria's leader is directly responsible, with reports of significant human and material losses by state media. Iran's supreme leader Ayatollah Ali Khamenei says that the US nuclear proposal is against national interest, as Iran's president says the country won't bow to US pressure. Several rounds of talks have come amid military threats from President Trump over failure to secure a deal. South Korea's new president Lee Jae-myung has pledged to turn the page on the recent martial law crisis and focus on revitalizing the nation's economy. Lee, who secured 49.4% of the vote, has appointed Kim Min-seok as Prime Minister, announcing a series of cabinet appointments as well. Taiwanese President Lai Ching-te says that the world will never forget the Tiananmen Square crackdown marking the 36th anniversary. On June the 4th, 1989, Chinese troops opened fire on a student-led protest, as Marco Rubio also praises the courage of those killed. China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao has called on the World Trade Organization to strengthen supervision over unilateral tariffs. While in France for the WTO meeting, Wang also met with European Trade Commissioner Maros Sefcovic, while also holding frank talks with his Canadian counterparts. Meanwhile, the US tariff rate on most imported steel and aluminium has doubled to 50% after President Trump signed an executive order confirming the move. The United Kingdom are exempt from the tariff hike, though, due to a preliminary trade deal. We start this hour with some breaking news, and Russia claims fresh gains in Ukraine, saying its troops have taken control of Rydkodub in eastern Ukraine and Kidrakivka in the northern Sumy region. The advances come amid Moscow's push to establish a buffer zone along the border. Well, after those updates, NATO Secretary-General Mark Rutte has set out a clear tone ahead of the summit in The Hague. Speaking at a press conference, he says Washington's commitment to NATO comes with strings attached. Europe and Canada must spend more on defence. Rutte confirms there are no plans for the US to withdraw troops from Europe. Instead, he says NATO will boost military readiness across the board. Top priorities include air and missile defences, long-range strike systems, robust logistics and large-scale land manoeuvres. Rutte adds that new defence targets will demand concrete contributions from every ally. These targets, he says, are crucial to deter aggression and protect NATO territory. The announcements come as defence ministers gather in Brussels for a Ukraine aid meeting co-led by the UK and Germany. The summit comes at a time when the US Defence Secretary Pete Hegseth has opted out of the meeting, marking a shift in America's direct involvement. Well, joining us to discuss these developments amid, of course, tensions over the ongoing Russia-Ukraine conflict is Keith Vaz, a former UK minister who is joining us from London. Keith, it's a pleasure as always to have you on the programme. Let's first look at Mark Rutte's comments saying that US support will remain, but if there's European spending and Canadian spending on defence, what do you think the the US perspective is on defence across the NATO board.
Good afternoon, Joshua from London. This has been a very familiar mantra that has come out of NATO and the United States ever since President Trump was first elected, that NATO is not spending enough in order to meet the targets. As you know, the target is 2% of GDP. The NATO budget is currently 3.6 billion euros a year. And what Mr. Rutte is trying to do is to speak with the voice, the clear voice of America. Everyone needs to pay more, but also try to keep on board European allies. He himself is a former prime minister of a European country, an EU country, and therefore he knows the pressure on individual budgets. But this has been something that President Trump has said for many, many years. So he's just repeating what's coming out of the White House. Why should they pay? Why should the American taxpayer pay for the defense of people in Europe? So this is a big question. What he set out is a number of capabilities that he hopes that NATO can make sure are put into place. But he's also saying this cannot be done without an increase in expenditure from individual countries. Now, we know that Germany, France, the United Kingdom, the big countries of the EU are going to step up and pay more. This week alone, Keir Starmer in the UK has announced that more factories are to be built. And therefore, people understand they're in a completely different ball game to where they were before. So everyone realizes they've got to spend more on defense, but they're trying to budget against, the current situation that we have, which is very difficult. There are a lot of pressures on international and national budgets, and people have to try and work out how they're going to pay for all this. The ongoing conflict in Ukraine, as you said, Joshua, is also causing a big drain on budgets, and individual countries are doing stuff that is beyond what is being done by NATO. So there's a big focus now on defense expenditure.
Yes, and Keith, given the fact that the NATO chief said that defence spending needs to increase, what impact could this have following announcements from the UK, as you've mentioned, and further announcements expected from leading European nations? What impact could this have on support for Ukraine ahead of this annual meeting that is set to take place in Brussels later today?
Well, it's obviously going to be a big moment to focus on budgets and expenditure. One of the problems NATO has, and the NATO countries, kingdom, is that what President Trump is saying is you need to spend more, but you need to buy your arms from us because we are the best at making these arms. So a lot of countries will be reluctant to do that. I think they've got the capability in their own country to be able to spend their money and therefore create the jobs that are going to be created with an increase in expenditure. This will certainly focus the minds of all those who are meeting in Brussels to know that they are now in a completely different part of the discussion. So, I mean, this is not new, Joshua. To be fair to Donald Trump, he has said this for every single moment that he's been the president of the United States. We are not going to be the bankroller to European defense. If you want more capabilities, you pay for them. And therefore, a lot of the countries will be thinking, can we buy from each other? Can we help the EU, the European economy, rather than having to buy from the Americans? The Canadians have been very clear as well that they would like to buy from France and the EU rather than have to buy from the United States. So there's money behind all this. There's pure economics behind what President Trump is saying, which is increase your capabilities, but buy from us.
Yes, Keith, let's move away now from the economics of this situation and look towards the current war ongoing between Russia and Ukraine. We opened the programme with that breaking news that further advancements have been made by Russian forces in eastern Ukraine. Given that there has been general support from Ukrainian allies, what's the significance that Pete Hegseth isn't going to be there, and how much US support is needed amidst stalling peace talks?
Well, what on earth is going on there? You're absolutely right, Joshua. Remember what President said. On day one, he's going to end the war in Ukraine. He's found Vladimir Putin to be a very difficult person to push around. And Putin has been playing him a little. And obviously, he's a very clever leader. You can't remain president of Russia for all these years without being very intelligent and very strategic. So the problem they have is the war is not ending. It seems to be getting worse. We saw the operation only this week when we saw a number of Russian planes being bombed as they were on the tarmac. We've now seen the reprisal from the Russian authorities. Whenever one side does something, the other side does something to match it. So this is not getting better, it's getting worse. The peace negotiations are not advancing, they are retreating. Somebody has got to get in there and sort this out, because it could well be getting to a situation where a year on from President Trump's election, it's still not been sorted out. I mean, maybe in the end it's good shaking hands and doing the deal there, but you've got to include Zelensky. President Zelensky has got to be there. If he's not there, there can be no deal on the Ukraine. So this is now much more complicated than what the American administration thought it would be. You're dealing not with robots, but with human beings, with particular constituencies that they've got to deal with. And that means the Russians are just not going to give up what they've got. The Ukrainians are not going to give it up. And whatever the United States says, it's just not going to happen.
Yes, and Keith, to end this discussion, let's loop back round now to NATO and this defence spending call that we've seen from Mark Rutte. How linked is this to a potential fear from NATO nations, specifically Western European nations, about the threat that Russia poses to them?
Well, Romania and in Poland, where Ukraine and Russia have featured very, very lead. And of course it's going to cause everyone concern. And I think it is essential that people focus on the changes that are happening, especially in Eastern Europe. We have one president elected in Romania who is very pro-EU and very pro-Ukraine. We have another elected in Poland who is not so keen on the EU. But I think what binds them all together is the fact that they're all against Russia. So there are massive changes going on in Europe which need to be scrutinized and addressed. And I think that the summit today in Brussels, which is very important, will be looking at that very carefully.
Keith, Vaz, as always, thank you ever so much for providing such a unique insight there. We will, of course, be across all the developments from that meeting in Brussels and as the war between Russia and Ukraine continues. We move on now, and tensions are rising between China and the European Union over trade policies, with strong statements from both sides. Europe's trade chief, Stéphane Séjourné, says export bans only strengthen the EU's determination to diversify. He emphasised that reducing dependence on China is now crucial for the bloc's future. In response, China's Commerce Minister Wang Wentao urged France to help the EU work in the same direction to resolve trade differences. He stressed that disputes in bilateral trade are normal but must be handled through dialogue. Wang also called on the World Trade Organization to tighten supervision over unilateral tariffs and to play a stronger role in global economic governance. The Chinese minister met with his European, French and Canadian counterparts in France for intense talks on trade. He said China remains committed to multilateralism and deeper cooperation. Meanwhile, US President Donald Trump has weighed in, calling China's Xi Jinping tough and hard to make a deal with. Trump's comments come as legal battles over his own China tariffs continue in US courts. Well, lots of developments there from the past few hours. Joining us to discuss them is Biao Teng, a Chinese affairs expert who is joining us from Washington, DC. Thank you very much, Biao, for joining us. Let's first look at these comments that we've had from President Trump, of course, in the midst of a trade standoff, at points being called a trade war, with tariffs not just with China but several other nations being implemented, redacted, changed, doubled. We've seen it all, but we've now heard from Trump talking about a relationship with Xi and how difficult it is to get a deal done. How significant is this for both the US and China to move past these trade tensions?
First, the tariff war on China can't work. It harms the United States. It harms the Chinese people. So all the experts, economists won't agree this kind of tariff war. And the China-U.S. relations are very, very complicated. It relates to not only economy, but also international geopolitics. So in the first term of Donald Trump, he didn't care about human rights or democratization of China. And he actually isolated the United States from its democratic allies. So this time, it's already messy. It goes ups and down, and it harms the image of the United States. It also jeopardizes the allies internationally. So I think from the past conversations between Xi Jinping and Donald Trump, I think their relation actually will empower the authoritarian system in China, the totalitarian system in China. It won't bring China to a better future.
Yes, and we've heard from the Chinese Minister Wang at the World Trade Organization. He's called for more unilateral tariffs to be tightly scrutinized and looked over, and potentially more influence from the World Trade Organization. Do you think this is China making a call for help, or is this just highlighting the ongoing issues and trying to put pressure on the US amid these tough relationships?
Yeah, so the tariff war also gave pressure to the Chinese government. Now the Chinese authorities are facing a difficult time. They need economic growth. They need international market. Because the number one priority of the Chinese Communist Party is to maintain their monopoly of power, maintain their autocratic system. And so China entered the World Trade Organization in 2001, and that made China's economic growth very, very fast. And China has become the number two world economy. Actually, as to PPP, China has become the number one economy in the world. But China remains dictatorial system, and that's not the exception when the United States and other countries allow China to enter the trade organization. They expected China would become a free and democratic country due to the economic growth and the international marketization. but now, another thing is China didn't keep its promise of entering the WTO, and they break the rules and they try to reshape the international economic order. And now they need the World Trade Organization to give pressure to the United States, and that's ridiculous. That won't work. Yeah.
Yes. And to bring an end to our discussion, we know that the Commerce Minister has had conversations on the sidelines with his European counterpart, French counterpart, Canadian counterpart. You mentioned there China is the second largest economy. We know that some of the action from the world's largest economy has ruffled some feathers. How do you think these conversations will be going? And is there a risk that China could ostracize themselves on the economic scale?
Yeah, as I said, the trade war, the Trump policy actually harms both the United States and China. And they need negotiation, they need compromise, and especially from the side of the United States, the approval rate for Donald Trump is dropping down, and American economy is facing a lot of trouble, and this kind of a system is still a democracy. So from this point of view, the pressure in the Chinese leaders is lesser than the United States. So I'm afraid both sides needs compromise, needs negotiation, but the Chinese government is able to care less about Chinese people. They actually don't care about the living condition of most Chinese people, and they need political benefits. They need benefits for its own party, the Chinese Communist Party. So I think it will be difficult. It will be tough, especially for the United States.
Yao Tang, thank you ever so much for joining us on the programme and providing your insights. We stay in the Indo-Pacific now, as South Korea has elected Liberal candidate Lee Jae-myung as president following a snap election. Soon after his victory, he announced his first round of senior cabinet appointments. The new team includes veteran lawmakers and experienced diplomats chosen for their expertise. Later, President Lee addressed supporters outside the National Assembly, pledging to uphold the responsibilities of his office by uniting the nation and pursuing peaceful dialogue with North Korea. Let's have a listen to what he said.
북한 GDP의 2배에 달하는 국방비, 세계 5위의 군사력, 여기에 한미 군사 동맹에 기반한 강력한 억지력으로 북핵과 북한의 군사 도발에 대응하되 북한과의 소통 창구를 열고 대화 협력을 통해 한반도.
Well, Chinese President Xi Jinping and State Secretary Marco Rubio congratulated him, with Rubio hoping to strengthen US and South Korean relations. Lee's victory marks a major turning point for South Korea following the collapse of the Yoon Suk-yeol administration. Lee has now assumed leadership with a commitment to a pragmatic and pro-market governance. He faces the task of restoring public trust, reviving the economy and small businesses. Citizens have expressed cautious optimism, hoping for a renewal of democratic values and economic stability. President Lee is expected to maintain engagement with Japan while adopting a more conciliatory approach towards China and North Korea. Well, joining us once again on the programme is Dr. Sanjay Kumar, who is going to discuss these developments with us. He is a journalist at the Korea Herald, joining us from Seoul. Dr. Kumar, thank you for once again joining us. today. I first want to look at some of the reactions that we've had in President Xi of China, Secretary of State Marco Rubio, both reacting. These are two relationships that South Korea rely on, whether that's because of provocations, geopolitical concerns, or trade tensions. How do you think that President Lee will now juggle both of those relationships and keep both happy for the country's best interests?
Yes, from China's perspective also, when you see the remarks of the Lee Jae-myung during his victory speech about peaceful coexistence, there is a common ground for China and Korea in this regard. And for China also, peaceful Korean Peninsula has always been one of the key agendas. So from China's perspective, it is always very fruitful to engage South Korea and North Korea and maintain a peaceful coexistence in the entire region, the East Asian region. So, we can also expect that some trilateral cooperation meetings or high-level meetings may work in coming months. And we should also not forget that Xi Jinping is likely to attend the APEC summit also, which is going to be held in Gyeongju, Korea. So there had been a very positive concern from both the sides that this year maybe Xi Jinping can cement the ties between Korea and China, which was not going through a good shape. So you can see from China's perspective as a good opportunity to mend ties, and from Seoul's perspective also, they are trying to engage North Korea through a dialogue. So many in the diplomatic circuit are seeing it as a positive but important development.
Yes, absolutely. And there is cautious optimism, of course, after political instability, after a brief martial law imposition and then further impeachments. How positive are the people of South Korea feeling following the results of this snap election?
From Korean people's perspective, this election has turned down many uncertainties that the political crisis they were going through due to the political crisis and the caretaking government. Because when you have a caretaker government, things do not finalize, and diplomacy was also not very active, and there was also great concern like who is going to talk to President Trump. So now we can see euphoria, we would say, in the Korean society that we are done with this political crisis. So now we have to connect some dots and open some communication channel through various means with Washington. And as you were mentioning, Xi Jinping has shown interest, so also with the Beijing. So yeah, in East Asia, it is a new development, and Japan is also trying to engage South Korea in various means. So, the Japan-Korea relations had been in a very good shape during former President Yoon's administration. So from Korean side, they will not try to lose any leverage when it comes to Japan-Korea relations. But at the same time, they will try to mend. Of course, there is always some kind of anti-Chinese sentiments also among Korean public. But after Lee Jae-myung has emerged as a big leader, we can say that the tone is going to be down, and definitely we can see like Korea-China relationship again going in a very softer and in a healthy direction. And I think if Xi Jinping, as a follow-up, if he confirms his arrival to South Korea, especially during the APEC summit, it would send a very great message, and it is good for the the East Asian political and the geopolitical dynamics as well. Like the East Asian cooperation had been lingering since a long time, so this may revive the legacy of East Asian trilateral cooperation as well. So we should see from this euphoric perspective.
Yes, absolutely, Dr. Sanjay Kumar. Thank you ever so much for joining us. The optimism also joined in the markets with them rising. We wait to see how this plays out and how Lee can ride that wave of instability following the political chaos in South Korea. But that is all that we have time for. We'll continue to bring you all of the latest updates from across the world very soon.